Hello and good morning. My name is Francine Harrigan. I'm with the United Nations Department of Public Information. We're very pleased to have you join us today for the launch of the second Sustainable Development Goals report. As countries begin presenting their SDG implementation plans at the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development taking place at UN headquarters this week, I'm very pleased to welcome USG for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Hongbo, to tell us about the report's findings. Also joining Mr. Wu to his left, Mr. Stefan Schweinfest, Director of UN Statistics Division, and Ms. Yang Yi Min, Chief of the SDG Monitoring Unit, also in the UN Statistics Division. With that, Mr. Wu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are now launching today the Sustainable Development Report 2017. This yearly publication takes the pulse on global implementation of the SDGs. It identifies where we have progressed and underlines the gaps that remain to fulfill the ambitions of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2030 Agenda provides a transformative blueprint to end poverty and hunger by 2030, deliver shared prosperity for all people, and protect our planet. It resolves to leave no one behind and to foster a world of peace, security, and justice. In this second year of implementation, time is of essence. Indeed, we can point to the improvements in some areas of the agenda implementation. However, the report shows that the rate of progress in many areas is far slower than needed to meet the goals and targets by 2030. The rate of extreme poverty was reduced to 11%. Yet, this translates to an estimated 767 million people still living with severe deprivations on less than $1.9 a day. Many of those who have escaped extreme poverty live just above the poverty line and are likely and highly vulnerable to falling back again. Maternal deaths have declined, but we need to double the rate of reduction in order to meet the target. Quality education and learning opportunities are still not reaching millions of children who remain out of school. Gender inequality remains deeply entrenched, and youth unemployment is pervasive. Progress falls short of what is needed for affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Our environment continues to bear the brunt of our actions, leaving more than 2 billion people to confront water stress, and 9 out of 10 cities dwellers breathing polluted air. with the planetary warming reaching a new record of about 1.1 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial period, it is evident that we have only a limited time to tackle these issues. The 2030 Agenda cannot be achieved without building synergies across all dimensions of poverty eradication and sustainable development. The roadmaps exist. The global community has developed the best way forward through the Agenda 2030, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the Paris Agreement. It now requires continuing the momentum by renewing high-level political leadership and creating new partnerships. These roadmaps are mutually reinforcing and inseparable. They go hand in hand, resting fundamentally on upholding human rights and ensuring peace and security. At the heart of our effort is the promise to leave no one behind. This means we must continue to mobilize actions to bring these agenda meaningfully and tangibly to life. We must prioritize marginalized and vulnerable people and the communities. The report also provides a snapshot of where we are today, highlighting the gaps that require the attention of leaders and the global community. It also brings to center stage the crucial need for ensuring that reliable, timely, accessible, and disaggregated data become more readily available as we move forward. Thank you very much, and my colleagues and I will be ready for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. I'll now pass the floor to Mr. Schweinfest.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning. I mean, whilst our Undersecretary General has given the really big panorama and also how all our information fits into the policy agenda, let me just squeeze in the middle before we go to the details of the report, a few reflections as a Director of Statistics on how we get to such a report. This is a proud end product of a big process. I call it the tip of the iceberg. We at the UN Statistics Division, we are collecting data on many, many areas with the help of our friends in the UN system and the specialized agencies on every country on the world. You know that the GA resolution just a few days ago codified the global database and framework with 232 indicators. And of course, anything like this can only be a selection, an excerpt, as I said, the tip of the iceberg. Behind that, extensive data collections, and I invite you also to come to our website where you will find much more detailed information on individual countries and on the various areas. There you will see that we can be very proud on what we have, but we also must be concerned about what we don't have. Because obviously the data demands are enormous, and the resolution that adopts the 232 indicator talks about this, that we cannot just write on the wall a long list of indicators we would like to have. We need to now really invest in the underlying data, and we need to do it in a way that we will get good and sustainable data, not just any piece of information. The MDGs have shown that we can do that. We can show over the 15 years of the MDGs, between 2000 and 2015, how we have increased by all kinds of measures the availability of information in all countries and in all areas, if we just focus our mind on this. And this is such a moment. We now need to focus our mind to improve the data. Now, if you if you read texts about statistics and data, everybody talks about this these days, you will read things like data communities, data ecosystems, data architecture, data systems, etc., etc., etc. What does this all mean? And in simple terms, it means we need help. I mean, several communities, several users and stakeholders need to come together and bring their pieces of information to the table. And we are talking about systems and architecture, which means that it has to be done in an organized fashion, so that data that are collected at the local, at the subnational, at the national, regional, and global level actually fit together and do not start confusing the users and contradicting each other. This is no small task. We need captains at various levels. I mean, the UN Statistical Commission is such a captain here at the global level, and steering the work not only on the formulation of good indicators, but also the implementation and the capacity building programs that are needed. And at the national level, we have the national statistical offices that sit in the middle of a national statistical system that does not only include nowadays official data provider, but also big data provider, geospatial systems, bringing all kinds of pieces of information together, as I said, in order to help us better measure what we need to measure with the agenda. And I don't want to go in much more detail, because I think it's much more interesting to actually look at the report, and I will leave that to my expert colleague, Yonghi. One last word about disaggregation. This report is at a very high level. It even doesn't talk about country data, it talks about regional data. But underneath, as I said, sits a whole solid mountain of data. And we talk a lot about disaggregation to identify vulnerable groups. And disaggregation is the statistical translation of the policy concept of leaving no one behind. If you want to leave no one behind, you need to have the information on people, on vulnerable groups. So disaggregation is what we need to do in statistics. And we do it. I have an event on city data this afternoon. I have a panel discussion on administrative records at 6 o'clock this evening. So we are drilling deep. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. And with these words, I'll turn it over to my colleague to give you a little bit of a few highlights of our report this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to provide a few highlights from the report. So let's look at the goals that relate to people. As Mr. Wu mentioned, that more than close to 1 billion people have been lifted from extreme poverty since 1999, but still 1 in 9 people still lived under $1.90 per person per day. And from 2000 to 2016, the number of children under 5 who were stunted has decreased, and the number of children who were overweight increased. And if we look at the numbers, there's still 155 million children who are currently stunted, which is almost 1 in 4 children under age 5. And there's many significant progress in the health area. So I'll just give you one example. The risk of dying between age 30 and 70 from one of the 4 non-communicable diseases fell from 23% to 19% from 2000 to 2015. And 1 in 5 women and girls aged 15 to 49 were subject to physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner. So let's look at a few facts from the water, sanitation, and environment areas. And from the newly released data from WHO and UNICEF, we see that 5.2 billion people used a safely managed drinking water service in 2015, which is 71% of the population. But only 2.9 billion people use a safely managed sanitation service, which is 39% of the population. And as the CO2 levels increase, the estimates indicate that ocean could be 150% more acidic in 2100. We also see that there's a more terrestrial freshwater and mountain key biodiversity area has been protected. And look at the goals related to prosperities. I'm just highlight a few of them. So electricity access in rural and urban areas has a big difference. So there 96% of the urban population has access to electricity compared to only 73% of rural population. And then look at the labor, so like a child labor. So around 1 in 10 children worldwide were engaged in child labor in 2012. That's equivalent to 169 million children, and half of these children engaged in hazardous work. And good news is the global investment in research and development has increased at an annual rate of 4.5% from 2000 to 2014. And the last two goals, the peace and partnership. Although the share of women of victims of trafficking have decreased, but still over 70% of the victims of trafficking were women and girls in 2014, and more than a quarter were children. Look at the ODA. ODA is increased by 8.9% from 2015 to 2016, reached a new peak. However, if we look at the bilateral aid to the least developed country, it fell by 3.9%. So to eradicate poverty and promote prosperity, we need to look into the interlinkages across the different dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals. To lift the people from poverty, we want to ask the question, where do they live? What do they do? What are the main composition of this group? So the report tells us that 80% of the world's poor live in rural areas, 64% work in agricultural sectors, and half of these people were children under age 18. And we also see the most vulnerable are being left behind. So in 2015, 85% of the urban population used safely managed drinking water services compared to only 55% of the rural population. And youth were nearly 3 times more likely than adults to be unemployed. And conflict or war are the most insurmountable barrier to poverty eradication and sustainable development. By the end of 2016, there was 65.6 million displaced people, which is 300,000 more than 2015. And we also see that women still face structural disadvantages in escaping poverty. For example, 1 in 4 women aged 20 to 24 were married before the age 18 in 2015. This is a common practice in Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, which also the home of 80% world's poor. So early marriage are likely linked to early childbirth, which limit girls' education, autonomy, and economic potential. So you can explore the report on our website, and all the data and chart can be downloadable. And this year we also have a new way to explore the report that we call the SDG story map, and we're going to include a map for the report. And today we also launched the SDG global database, as Stefan mentioned. So this database contains more than 500,000 data points of country-level data, regional-level data, and global data. And we also have the SDG indicator metadata repository. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yang Yi. With that, we'll open the floor to questions. Sharon, I see you have one.
Thanks, Francine. Thanks to the panel. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, welcome to the press briefing room, and thank you for coming to talk with us. Sherman Briceby, South African Broadcasting. I guess if you look at the attendance in this room behind me, you see a lot of empty chairs. There seems to be a disconnect between perhaps the gravity of the report and the findings of this report and the interest you get certainly from the media and by extension people out there. I mean, there's a session on the liberation of Mosul in the Security Council, and I think you'll find most journalists there rather than in this room, and yet this is probably more important given that it affects more lives around the world. So do you recognize this disconnect, and what are you doing about it?
Well, what you are saying is really fact. We do not have enough people we should have here. But I'm not that pessimistic. Look at the countries volunteered for national review. Last year we have only 22. This year we have 44. We closed our doors very quickly because there are more than 10 countries waiting outside. It's already 17 countries volunteered for 2018 national voluntary review. So you see the enthusiasm and the ownership demonstrated in the sheer fact that more and more national governments would like to get involved. Well, it is true. When you have something like the armed conflict, humanitarian crisis, that will immediately catch the attention of the people. But I would agree with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He was saying the spots of armed conflicts or wars are really the spot of SDG failure or SDG crisis. So it is the global awareness of the importance of implementation of Agenda 2030 that holds the key. I'm so glad we have taken several steps forward already, but it's not enough. That's why the report will serve to tell the participants in the current high-level political forum where we stand, what the gaps we have identified, the way forward we hope to see. So they will build on this basis. I think this is also a wake-up call for those who are not very enthusiastic, not very interested in Agenda 2030 implementation. But all in all, I would be saying that we are optimistic, although sometimes we do not catch enough attention, but we are on the right track, and the global awareness of the importance of sustainable development is growing, and we are driving to that direction. Thank you.
If I may just follow up, the report is saying that acceleration is needed. Is it too early for us then to say that the goals will not be met in 2030? Why don't you come out and just say that if acceleration is not seen?
Well, we are saying that if we want going to meet the targets, we need to redouble our efforts. This is one way of saying it. You know, some of the goals and targets are really difficult to meet. However, if we do not have targets in mind, we even don't know where we should go. So I would not imagine that goals and targets are very easy to reach. There's no such a thing. But we encourage all the national governments, international community to make all-out efforts to do as much as we can. For instance, the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, we also set the target for eradication of poverty. We made tremendous progress, but we have not reached our final destination. That has been carried over to Sustainable Development Agenda. So we will continue what we've been doing, and we believe what we are doing is the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Take a question from the middle there, and then we'll turn to Matthew. Should be a...
Just put it to the mouth and snap. Turn it on for you.
Okay, I'm Ellen Wolforth of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Just to follow up on I have 2 questions. To follow up on what my colleague just asked you, is it correct to say that if the pace continues the way it is now, we won't meet the goals in 2030? Is that an accurate statement?
Would you like to say so? I'll give you your...
Well, you will never get a statistician to make a blanket statement like that. I mean, you will always get it with 5 footnotes and caveats. And I mean, some of the data we should also be careful here. We are not measuring from 2015 to 2017. I don't want to give that impression and then make a pronouncement as to the current pace and what we need until 2030. Development is much more complex in many areas. We do not have data for 15 or 16 yet, so we're basing ourselves on the longer trends. So in a way, we are also saying if we're sailing along the path that we did for the MDGs, which brought great progress, but I mean that will not be enough for reaching the goals of this more ambitious agenda, which is, I think, not only broader but also a more ambitious in its goals. So I think that's what we are trying to say here in a nutshell.
I just follow up. I did just figure this out. You have to push the button. My other question is, given the world political stage as it is today compared with 2 years ago, are you confident that if the SDGs had to be put up for a vote today, that they would have the same unanimous support that they did 2 years ago?
Let me respond to you. There are some difficulties, right, because if you compare what we have today and 2 years ago, it's different. However, I'm still optimistic. Let me tell you this. When the member states trying to follow Rio Plus 20, they are discussing the post-2015 development agenda or arrangements. 193 countries sitting under one roof, talking about whatever they have in mind. At that time, I was not really optimistic whether they would reach the agreement or not. But finally, they reached the famous Agenda 2030 with historic significance. Well, maybe 1 or 2 countries think that they don't like it. They will just pack up and go away. But that would not change the overall situation. The reason why 193 countries or 193 minus 1 or 2, because there's common consensus. Our current way of production, and consumption are not sustainable. If we want to survive this generation decently, we want to have a decent life for children and young generations to come, we need to do anything we do in a sustainable way. Well, this is the common basis and solid basis for all the national governments, for all the NGOs, for all the stakeholders, no matter what kind of religions they have, or the social systems or political beliefs. So if that rock, that basis is not shaken, I'm confident the majority of the international community will surge ahead, will go ahead with the sustainable development. I think those who regret it may later find they have to catch up. But it's more difficult to catch up when they are left behind. Thank you.
Other questions, please?
Sure, thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Intercity Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for the briefing. I was reading the report, and I wanted to ask, first I wanted to say, I was at the Security Council on Iraq. There's not that many correspondents there either. Yeah, so don't feel too bad. Yeah, well, for some. On goal 16 about accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels, this one jumped out, your bullet point where you say most countries have adopted freedom of information legislation, but implementation lags behind. And it jumped out at me because I wanted to know, it seems like the UN itself does not actually have freedom of information legislation. To my knowledge, there is no procedure under which the press or the public can ask for information. So this write-up, and I was glad to see the bullet point, but it seems to imply that at least your part of the UN feels that this is a good thing to have. So I guess I wanted to know, maybe Mr. Wu, as you leave, do you think the UN should have a freedom of information policy? And just one other thing that I'd asked you in the previous press conference you'd done on HighLevel Political Forum, about the input of civil society into nations' voluntary national reviews. And after you'd answered, the indigenous groups had a press conference in here, and they were pretty critical. They said it seems that the procedure for now is that countries get to pre-screen questions, that yes, a question can be asked from the floor, but it's a question that's been shown in advance to the country, and in some cases the questions are not allowed to be asked. So I wanted to know, do you think that they're maybe one of the reasons to get more people into this machinery of review is to allow more input and more sort of, input without censorship? Thanks.
Ms. Lee, I will take your last question first, and the inclusiveness of the High-Level Political Forum. We have to realize that High-Level Political Forum is intergovernmental process. It is mainly composed of the representative governments. But we also welcome the stakeholders to participate and make their contributions to the discussions. The great challenge for my department as the secretariat and organizer of the event is that we are trying to accommodate increasing number of NGOs and major groups and other stakeholders. Simply, this building was not built for NGOs or other stakeholders. It was built only for government representatives. And we are not foreseeing any dramatic or considerable extension in the future. But at the same time, we have more and more people coming in. So this is a challenge for us. However, I can assure you that we are inviting more stakeholders, other agencies, and representatives to participate. And also we invite their inputs. A lot of inputs are really has been considered when we're preparing the documents and background for discussions. Well, there are always complaints, but we will receive them with an open mind, and we'll analyze them and respond to their requests as early as possible, as fast as we can. What I would like to see that the High-Level Political Forum is growing. And we are learning from both our mistakes or shortcomings and also learning from our best practices. I would say by judging the last year's HLPF and this one, we are on the right track and we are growing stronger. And the 44 countries they volunteered for national review is an indicator. They are supportive and they really rely on this platform for exchange of views and also trying to learn from each other. Other people, like you mentioned, indigenous people, people with disabilities, young people, the aged group, and many others, they would like to have their voice heard. We fully understand it. And we will try to, in the future, to open more channels for communication. Your first question about the free information, I think this question should be maybe better answered by DPI, because we are responsible only for our own work. And as far as the Department of Economic, Social and Affairs is concerned, we try to be open and transparent. That's why we often introduce what is going on, what we've been doing with the events and conferences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I believe Stefan had a comment as well.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, it wasn't on that last question. I'm not the fastest, but I was still intrigued by your first question because you were asking what are we doing about the fact that not so many people are in the room. And in a way, I just wanted to add perhaps two thoughts. One is, I mean, we statisticians are not necessarily very good in communicating with people directly or the users directly sometimes. And so we often rely on intermediaries. So these are researchers. I mean, we produce data, numbers, and nobody gets very excited by numbers. We already translated many of the numbers into nice graphs and and colorful images here, which is a first step, but I think it needs to go even further. So we rely on researchers, analysts, and you. I think the press and the media are an important element in helping us to make that communication between the producers of information, of data, which we are, and the people who need to actually use the data. And this is on all levels. I mean, I'm not only talking about governments, and so, but I mean, even city governments or people that are responsible for certain sectors in society and every single citizen. I mean, it is hopefully affecting the behavior of every single citizen if we are reading in what dire state our environment is. And so I would appeal to you also to help us to make that communication, because sometimes we are not very good at it, and we are increasingly creating platforms for that. So I mean, last year we had, this year actually we had a World Data Forum, and normally when we invite people are running the other direction, but in Cape Town, I mean, we had 1,400 people, and they represented all wakes of life, not only the statisticians that produce the numbers, but also policy users, citizen, CSO, private companies. And what was missing perhaps a little bit was media and helping us to make an effective argument and tell the story that is contained in the data that we are putting together on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Stefan. And with that, Young-Yu, any last comments? Otherwise, I'll close the briefing.
As a statistician, I just want to mention that this report we produce like 99 graph maps and charts, and we also produce 42 icons to try just to communicate the story very easily for general public media to understand. Thank you.
Conference. I thank our presenters, and I thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you.